Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hi, everybody. This is Lois Sonstegard with Building Your Legacy. I am today with Joe Lee. I am so excited to introduce him to you all because he's young, he's energetic, and he has begun his mid-level career by already looking at what his 40-year plan is. Where is it that he wants to go? He knows the legacy that he wants to leave. And so he has worked his way backwards to try and figure out what are the steps that he needs to put in place in order to accomplish his 40-year plan. So I'm really excited to bring Joe to you. And Joe, if you would just share a little bit about your background and how you got to where you're going and what motivates you.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Thanks for having me on today. I really appreciate that. Thank you for all you've said so far. My journey, I was born and raised in the Midwest, and then I moved up to Pennsylvania to be with my family. And so that's kind of the history where I come from. We came from I would say a poor type of we just didn't have a lot of money. We had enough to meet needs, but that was about it. And so that kind of governed a lot of things for many years for me. When I turned 18, I joined the military. And I served our country for right around 23, almost 24 years. I served in the Army, both on active duty, reserve, and National Guard. And that served for a lot of the foundational leadership principles and things that I've learned over the years. I started in the infantry, and then I became a combat medic, and then I became a medical lab tech. And then I ended up my career in the intelligence field. So I've done a little bit of everything in the military. As well as serving our wounded vets. I did that for a while. So it was people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. When I worked at Walter Reed, I was very influential there in working with those families and those soldiers. So that's been a lot of fun. When I left the military, one of my additional passions has always been health and fitness. Since the time I was a kid, like a 14-year-old, I was introduced to alternative health therapies and figuring out that, hey, the body can take care of itself. And if you just maintain and do a couple things, you're probably going to be a little bit better off. And so I pursued the fitness arena after leaving the military. And I ended up running a CrossFit program. If you're familiar with fitness, I ran a CrossFit program. And then after that kind of transition, I transitioned to a management facility capacity with the ownership I was working with. And from there, I through that whole story, there's always been this underlying thread of leadership. I've always been reading and studying and obtaining certifications and going to conferences and trying to expand who I am so that I can help other people. And at the end of the day, that's always been the underlying purpose of my existence, is that I believe that I live to serve others and to raise them up into a higher capacity. And as a Christian, that's really where the heart of it lies, is I want to raise Christian leaders. And so that's, in a nutshell, that's the short version. Okay. So feel free to ask any details.
Tell the audience about your 40-year goal, because I'm fascinated. Most people don't really think through what's the end of their life going to look like and look backwards from it. So you have defined for yourself what success will be at the end of your life. What is that? What is this vision that you have? Let's start there.
Okay. Well, I'm a huge John Maxwell fan. I'm John Maxwell certified coach, speaker, and trainer. And one of John's principles he teaches a lot about is legacy. And that's always in the back of my mind. I had a lot of struggles when I was really young at home, and I made some decisions a long time ago that I wouldn't have a family on my own based upon those interactions, because I knew I didn't want to perpetuate a legacy that I was seeing. And that meant I ended up in a blended family with 4 kids. I married into 4 children and a wonderful wife. And so that's kind of the framework that kind of brought me to why a 40-year plan. And the 40-year plan is I want to bring leadership back to the church. I believe that absolutely everything rises and falls on leadership. And I believe that the challenges that we're seeing in the world and the challenges that we're seeing in the churches today are the result of failed leadership. We can't say everything rises and falls on leadership except within the church, because it does. If we see problems in churches, if we see people leaving the church, if we see unethical behavior in the church, it's because of the leadership. And I want to bring leadership back to the church, and then I want to reinvigorate. When I use the word reinvigorate, I want to bring passion back to our youth for Christ. I believe that the youth are the future. If I work with, say, I coach somebody and they're 50 or 60 years old, they have, on average, statistically speaking, they're going to live to be about 85. That means I'll have somewhere between 20 and 30 years where they'll be able to take those principles and philosophies and really bring those to the world. If I work with somebody that's between 15 and 20, I can get 40, 60 more years out of that same individual where they have a better lens to look at the world through, and they have a better message to bring to the world, and they can really shape this world in a much better and much healthier way. And so that's the 40-year goals. I plan on dedicating the rest of my entire functional life to this mission until I'm no longer here. That's my intent. Is to spend the next 40 years working on that mission and building an organization of leaders, teaching leaders, so that they can bring that to the church and change what people know the church as today. And we need to get back to the, not what would be a New Testament looking church, but a Jesus looking church.
So that's an interesting place to start from, I think, because you talk about leadership, bringing leadership back to the church, and it's leadership at not only churches, it's in our businesses, it's everywhere, isn't it? Because there's something that we're struggling for, that we're somehow missing, but don't have our fingers on, perhaps. So can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that? What is the missing element of leadership that needs to be brought back?
That's a really good question. I wish leadership was really simple and really straightforward, and that everybody it was just that simple. John has a program called the 5 Levels of Leadership, and most people associate leadership with that first level, which is that positional leadership, which is the weakest form of leadership. However, that's what most people think of and what most people see, and we arbitrarily know that there's more to it than that, but we don't always know what it is. And so we look at that positional leadership. We look at things like charisma, natural charisma, or speaking ability, or going to the right school, or having the right friend network. And then all of a sudden we think, oh, okay, that's leadership. And it's just not. There's the big, huge. If I had to nail it down to one huge component that I think is really at the crux of a lot of our leadership issues, it's that personal responsibility, or what you can call extreme ownership. Jocko Willink has a book out called Extreme Ownership that I absolutely love, and it talks about that. It's all about extreme ownership. And I think as a leader, that's one of the things that's really missing for a lot of people. It's easy to look back through my life and see where I've made excuses or blamed my circumstances, or let's use a real common example for everybody. We make a choice every day when we get up, whether we're going to whether we're going to execute our day for the very best of our ability, or we're going to let the day execute us. And for many, many people, the day executes us. but you have to be able to step into your life and accept responsibility for that decision. When I get up in the morning and I roll out again, I have about 5 seconds before my feet hit the floor. If I choose to lay in bed for 2 minutes, my whole day is different. And I either own that responsibility for that, or I blame the circumstance. I was tired. I stayed up late. I had to be, recently I had to be at the emergency room till 1 or 2 in the morning. One morning I was in the emergency room till 3 in the morning. I can either, and those are really bizarre examples, but I can either own that, or I can let that circumstance own me. And I have to make that choice every day. And, it's a lot of things are just really that simple. When we look at leadership, we can either, I'll just go back to the framework we talked about originally, the fact that our youth are leaving the churches at greater numbers than ever before. We can look at that situation and we can say, well, it's TV, it's iPhones, it's the internet, it's social media, it's this, it's that, it's social pressures and all that stuff. That's not accepting responsibility for the problem. Accepting responsibility for the problem is the leaders within the church stepping up and saying, 20 years ago, we started this. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we're the problem now. And these are these are typically what we would consider elders, maybe in whatever your denomination is, how your leadership structure is. These are senior leaders. And that we have to accept responsibility for those things. And we have to say entertainment hasn't worked. What's next?
So I'm hearing two things from you. One is that, yes, entertainment doesn't work. And the other is what's happening, the issues that our young people are having are our responsibility for whatever reason. And it's knowing what to do about it and being accountable. But I think that accountability requires knowing what's wrong, what's not working, and what you replace it with. Because a vacuum doesn't work, right?
Yeah. Right. Correct. Nature abhors a vacuum. And we'll fill it with something.
Abhors a vacuum. Is that what you said?
Yeah. Nature abhors a vacuum.
Yeah. And that's the tendency, isn't it, to just throw something out because it doesn't work. But how do we thoughtfully replace it? And I think that's true at every level, not just churches. It's true in our businesses. Something doesn't work, we get rid of it, and but we don't replace it thoughtfully. And many times because we're just glad to have that problem gone, but we don't think about, is it creating a vacuum that needs to be addressed? So that's very interesting that you speak to that.
Yeah, and I think it's a fairly significant a problem. There's several things that I see as a genesis for this, particularly in our churches, is that idea of autonomy. We want to be autonomous. We want to be these pillars of strength and everything for our community, and as a result, it's almost like we insulate ourselves from external inputs. Now, I know that there's organizations out there that are doing a fantastic job of this. However, the majority, though, I think the numbers speak for themselves. And so we set up these a lot of rules, a lot of, particularly coming out of many generations back, hundreds of years back. We have a lot of faith-based organizations are built on rules. Do this, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And so we have a lot of don't do that's. We don't know really what we need to be doing. And all those don't do that's keep everybody at bay from our leader. We don't know how to, and it closes off our receptivity to new ideas and to doing things maybe new and different ways. And so it was here where I am local. I had somebody told me they were out visiting a church the other day. When they walked in the door, they stepped back 20 years. You could just literally, it's palpable that the environment was somewhere between 20 to 40 years old.
Wow.
And that's not how we live into the 21st century. That's not how we lead into the 21st century. We have to be able to adjust, not to bring the culture of the world into the church, but figure out how we can live in that culture. We're supposed to live in the world, but not of the world. And we're trying to live anywhere but in the world. And so it creates a problem for our youth because we've lost authenticity. We've lost the ability to accept feedback and criticism and learn how to move forward. And so as a result of that, we don't make mistakes and adapt fast enough. And so you're right. We tend to throw things out, but it's don't do this, don't do that. Well, we can't have this, we can't have that. And we throw that out, but there's nothing there to replace it. Nothing there to take its to fill that void that was, who knows what it was that filled that. I've been everywhere and seen, not everywhere. I've been in a lot of places and seen a lot of things, and a lot of times you just throw something out, but you have this the minds that we're trying to work with are built around a different type of model. And then we're bringing them into a 20, 30, 50, 100-year-old model and trying to make that fit. And it doesn't mesh up.
So when you say that the model is 100 years old, the model that you're referring to specifically is the church, right?
Yes.
And so what is it about that is old and stayed and is not modern?
It's the dogmatic practices that we have that without getting into a lot of really in-depth history here, and I'm not a history guy, there were a lot of 150 years ago during the Stone Campbell era, there were a lot of decisions that were made because of some infighting in all of the Protestant churches. And that's where everything has kind of devolved from. So at that particular time, there were some major, just a handful of major denominations in the United States. And there was a conflict between a couple of these very, very prominent church leaders. And interestingly enough, their genesis was over really small and insignificant things. But as a result, human behavior. So when we have a conflict with somebody, regardless of, especially if we're passionate about that conflict, for whatever reason, if we can't resolve that conflict, we will identify a separate trigger and bring that trigger forward and make that our speaking platform, because we know it will create it'll create the division that we were looking for. So if we have conflict and somebody's not willing to fight with us, but it's passionate to us, we will go find something else to replace that they will take a stand on, so that we can have basically have our way. And one of the things that one of the stances that was taken very hard during the Stone Campbell era was women in the church. And I'm not going to advocate for one thing or another right here. That's not my point. The point is, that was one of the key issues when we couldn't fight over slavery because we agreed that there was some fundamental truths that were wrong with it. We fought over women instead. And that was something that we could divide the church over. And so massive, massive things took place. And so, but because that history is not widely known, and it's not taught, we still divide over whether or not that practices are okay or not. We have rules about who can serve and who can't serve in worship that have this isn't a cultural thing. This is a human being thing. This is we can go back to the New Testament and read through there, and the examples that were shown in the New Testament are not modeled in today's church. And I'm not trying to duplicate the New Testament church. We don't want to do that. We don't want to meet in houses, and we don't want to do some of these things that were common practice. What we do want to do is we want to be like Christ. And if we actually look at what he did, our churches, it's not the same. And so, but we continue to live in these old, outdated practices, and we continue to march them forward because it's easier than running the risk of sinning and leading your congregation astray. And so it's kind of that mantra of, well, we've always done it this way. And, that's one of those big bullets that goes up on people's walls in their boardrooms is, if we've always done it this way, then that's the thing we need to look at the hardest.
Got it.
That was a long explanation.
No, it's helpful. And I think that's true of so many things, Joe. We tend to do things because it's a habit. It's always been done that way. We don't think through, is that really essential? And one of the things that I have always enjoyed, having grown up in Japan, is that there are things that are part of American culture that we take as truisms. And because I came here at 19, I looked at them with different eyes and asked the question, is this real? Because I saw it being done differently and it worked differently, right? And but we impose our culture and then create a fixation around it that's the way it needs to be. And so we run our organizations that way. How we treat one another is based on those kinds of perspectives that we come with. And being able to have a frank discussion is really what enables us to take a look at that. But it can be also somewhat frightening to do that, because it may mean you have to shift your thought process, and change is hard, isn't it?
It is. You're familiar with the DISC test, and so my personality style falls into 3% of the population, and I'm high on the spectrum on both ends. So I'm a high D and a high C, which is an interesting and challenging personality to have. However, what it does is it makes it extremely challenging for me to see things through new eyes. It is. It's always. In probably the last 5 to 10 years, I've had my greatest expansion of my ability to see through new eyes, and it is extremely challenging. We tend to, for people that have my personality type, we love things the exact same way every single day. I have 16 things that I go through every morning. I love my habits. I love rituals. They give me an extreme amount of comfort, and ultimately the word is control. Always seeking control over things. And when I'm outside of that level of fear just escalates astronomically. And I can hold it together because I've trained myself how to do that over the years. That was one of the things the military taught me, is how do you hold yourself together when you're, walking in fear? And we call it courage, but sometimes it's just fear. And you're just taking one step at a time. But it's I think it doesn't just impact our churches, it impacts leadership all across the board in every aspect of our life. My kids have watched me evolve through countless iterations of my life as I left the military. I remember when I left the military, I was 2 years out, I had been out of the military, and I was sitting in my driveway in my minivan, and I had put the vehicle in park, and I was going through my head, and sitting there, I was going through my head, okay, am I staying today or am I leaving today? Because I was so used to moving every 2 years. I was so used to having my phone on and having to literally, I could be home for 30 minutes. They would call and say, hey, you need to come into work. And I'd have to go into work. And it wasn't something I ever blinked at. And when you bring that into a family, it doesn't work well. And so learning how to change and see things through, how does my family see me, is huge. There's 1,000 things about change and how that impacts people that I could definitely talk to. I've been, spending time overseas in Iraq and in Kosovo and in Germany and being all over the United States. Everything is different. Even how traffic lights work is different. I know you know that from Japan. The lights they function different. in Germany, what's a yellow light mean? Well, my son was in an accident this summer because he didn't understand what a yellow light means. He understands what it means in America, and he got in an accident because of it. If he was in Germany, he'd have got a much different ticket for that, but he probably would have avoided the accident. So yeah, it's how we see things.
It is, and I always think of that as being the perception gap.
Yes.
We have a perception of ourselves. Others have perception of who we are. And then you have the environment that has its own perceptions because of the rules that surround it. And if we're going to be effective, we're always challenged to look at how do we diminish that perception gap. But that is the challenge, because we have to begin with change. And so many times we're at odds in that process. And I think, Joe, when we start looking at building a legacy like what you're talking about, that's really, if you're going to look at how are you going to build leadership techniques and bring something to young people so that they can grow up to be tomorrow's leaders and disrupt whatever it is that's going on, whether it's our organizations, our families, our churches. It's a whole new set of skills, and they have to have a lens that is new and fresh, and the comfort to be able to change as what the lens is showing you shifts, right?
Yeah. It's in the last 3 weeks, I've been in a couple environments where I've just been floored. I was in a class the other day, and people were sharing about some of the struggles that they were going on within their life, and these were all health related. And literally, I think there was a dozen of us in there, and to the T, everyone said stress, anxiety. A lot of them are women. I was flabbergasted at how significant that pain is for people. And last night I was helping my son in the garage build a catapult, and he had a friend there, and she was talking about being upset with somebody because they made fun of something. Her costume, it was Halloween, so she had a costume on. They made fun of the costume that she wore, and she talked about, and she's 16. She was talking about how much that made her hurt, and I was floored at how deep of an impact this change can be. And you're speaking about an environment. How do we take people that have such high anxiety? They have, and I don't want to lump people into categories, but ADD, ADHD, they have these high functioning learning capacities that are very special. And how do we take that environment, people that are wired that way, because we can't undo the wiring. That was done by video games and TV. It was literally, there's physiological changes that happen in the brain. And so this is what we have. They're very high functioning people. They're some of the brightest people we have. How do we take those and create a teaching environment where they want to learn? And then they want to learn, they understand the value of the principles that are being taught, and then how can they move that forward? Because it's not about teaching one generation. It's about teaching them how to teach others what we've just shared with them and move that forward. That's a super big challenge that I'm kind of looking forward to, because it's going to pave the way for many, many generations, because nobody's tackling it, not head on.
Part of what that requires is that your life is compelling, right? Because to impact that next generation, our life has to be compelling enough that people want it. And I think so much of what we're seeing is a rejection of what people have experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, it has been 30 wonderful minutes. Time has gone so fast. And I appreciate your perspective so much, because so seldom do we look from the end and then start building what it is that we need to do. And so I really appreciate that challenge that you provide us. and also your perspective on leadership and how is it that we can go about really making and influencing the next generations to come. So thank you so much for your time today. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for your time. If you would like to have information about Joe or would like to get in contact with him, just email me and I will be glad to make that connection for you. So thank you so much for your time, Joe, for your time as part of our audience. And I look forward to our next podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.